There comes a moment when the kind one stops, not out of hatred, not out of exhaustion, but because they have finally understood that peace has a price, and often that price is people. This is the paradox we are here to unravel. Why do empaths lose everyone when they finally choose peace? You see, the world speaks of love and compassion, yet feeds on those who embody it the most. What you're about to hear may explain why the gentlest souls often end up walking alone, and why that solitude is not a curse, but the beginning of power. Once upon a time, the empath believed that kindness was a shield, that by giving enough, understanding enough, forgiving enough, they would be safe from betrayal. But the court of humanity is no sanctuary for saints. It is ruled by appetite, and in the grand feast of emotion, the empath is always the main course. Their heart becomes a treasury for the needy, a marketplace for the broken. They give endlessly, mistaking their exhaustion for purpose. Yet in truth, empathy without limits is not virtue. It is exposure. It is power disguised as weakness. But there comes a turning point. The day the empath withdraws, the silence arrives. No longer do they explain, fix, or absorb. They stop defending their kindness. And in that refusal, they discover rebellion. They realize peace is not found in people. It is found in boundaries. They learn that saying no is not cruelty, but clarity. And when they stop bleeding for those who never intended to heal, something remarkable happens. They become whole. Then comes the backlash. The world that once adored their softness begins to sneer. Those who thrived on their giving will call them distant, arrogant, or selfish. Why? Because their peace starves the parasites that once fed on their compassion. The empath loses everyone. But Machiavelli would tell you this is not loss. It is filtration. The departure of the false reveals the loyalty of the few. Those who vanish when you choose peace were never companions, only consumers. And in that solitude, the empath ascends. They discover sovereignty, a dangerous kind of calm. They now give without being drained, love without losing themselves, and speak without needing to be understood. Their peace is no longer fragile. It is fortified. The world that once took their light will one day look upon them and wonder how their warmth became so distant, so untouchable. But this is not the death of kindness. It is its evolution. So why do empaths lose everyone when they finally choose peace? Because peace exposes the counterfeit. It strips away the bonds built on chaos and dependency. And in that exposure, the empath transforms from servant to strategist. From prey to sovereign. They become what few ever dare to be, a kind soul, with a Machiavellian mind. You see, the world often mistakes kindness for fragility. It romanticizes the empath, the one who feels everything, the one who listens when no one else will, the one who holds the pain of others like it's their personal responsibility. But beneath that softness there lies something far more dangerous: power. A quiet, disarming kind of power that few ever recognize until it's too late. The empath walks into rooms filled with noise and chaos, and somehow everyone breathes easier. They stabilize what's unstable, they heal what's broken. Yet the tragedy is this: the more they give, the less the world respects them. Because in a society drunk on dominance, empathy looks like surrender. Every empath starts as a believer. They believe that their understanding will earn them love, that their gentleness will keep cruelty at bay. They believe that if they just love people enough, those people will learn to love them back the same way. But this is the first illusion, the most dangerous one. Because the world doesn't always reward kindness. It exploits it. And the empath in their innocence becomes the perfect target. People sense it. They feel the safety, the lack of resistance, the willingness to forgive. And they take until there's nothing left to take. The empath becomes the emotional supply, the healer, the peacekeeper. And in that role they forget they were ever meant to be anything else. The empath's heart is not weak. It is unguarded. And in a world built on strategy and self-preservation, being unguarded is the same as being defenseless. They absorb pain that isn't theirs, thinking it's compassion. They tolerate disrespect, thinking it's patience. They excuse manipulation, calling it understanding. But every time they do, they lose a piece of themselves. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they become invisible in the very relationships they sustain. People grow addicted to their energy but never curious about their exhaustion. The empath becomes the silent foundation everyone stands on, and no one notices until it collapses. And here lies the cruel twist. The empath's greatest strength is also their greatest vulnerability. Their ability to feel deeply gives them influence beyond measure. They can move people, inspire change, bring calm where there was chaos. But because they feel everything, they also endure everything. They suffer the weight of other people's storms while pretending to be the shelter. Their heart becomes a battlefield between compassion and self-betrayal. They want to help, but they can't admit that some people are beyond help. Not because they're broken, but because they enjoy being broken. It's a paradox. The empath by nature sees the good in everyone, even those who have none left. They don't walk away when things get hard. They stay, they fight, they believe. But in doing so, they attract the very people who thrive on that belief. The manipulators, the narcissists, the perpetual victims, they orbit the empath like moths to a flame, feeding off their light, until nothing but smoke remains. The empath, convinced that love can fix anything, becomes the martyr of their own compassion. And what makes it more tragic is that the empath doesn't realize this power imbalance until much later. They confuse emotional labor with connection. They think being the one who always understands means they are valued. But in truth, they are used, because those who depend on their light rarely intend to offer any in return. They simply grow accustomed to being nurtured, comforted, and forgiven, without ever asking themselves what it costs the empath to keep doing it. The empath becomes a mirror reflecting everyone's pain, and in that reflection their own identity fades. Think about it. The empath can walk into a room and sense the unspoken, the hidden frustration, the silent disappointment, the secret pain. They adjust themselves instantly, softening their tone, choosing their words carefully, diffusing tension without anyone realizing what just happened. That's not weakness. That's emotional intelligence at its most refined form. That's power. But because it's quiet, because it's not loud or aggressive, it's ignored. The world only respects power it can see, and empathy by nature hides its strength behind gentleness. It operates in silence. It persuades through understanding, not intimidation. Yet in a Machiavellian sense, this very invisibility makes it vulnerable. People exploit what they don't fear. The empath's curse, then, is this: they wield influence through love, but attract dependency through it as well. Their presence becomes addictive to others, not because those others love them, but because they love how they feel around them. That calm, that validation, that unconditional acceptance. It becomes a drug. And like any addiction, when the supply is endless, it's never appreciated. The empath keeps giving, thinking it's noble, until they realize that nobility is a lonely currency. They become the emotional backbone of others' lives while their own needs rot in silence. And it's not that the empath doesn't see what's happening. Deep down they know. They notice when the calls only come during crises, when the apologies never match the actions, when the people they've saved walk away the moment they're stable. But they stay. They stay because they mistake loyalty for love. Because to the empath, walking away feels cruel, even when staying is self-destruction. They keep hoping that their consistency will teach others how to care, not realizing that consistency only teaches the wrong people how much they can take advantage. This is the beginning of the empath's awakening. The slow realization that their so-called weakness was never weakness at all. It was raw power, disguised under gentleness. But power, when misunderstood, invites predators. The empath's light draws shadows. Their empathy, once a gift, becomes a magnet for those who see kindness, not as something to cherish, but as something to consume. And so the empath keeps bleeding, quietly, beautifully, believing that love alone can heal everything. Until one day, it doesn't. There comes a moment, subtle, quiet, almost invisible, when something inside the empath changes. It's not rage, it's not bitterness, it's not even sadness. It's simply a quiet exhaustion that no one else notices. The kind of tired that seeps into the soul. The empath, who once poured endlessly into everyone around them, suddenly realizes that they are empty, that their giving has turned into a cycle, and no matter how much they offer, it never fills the void, it only deepens it. And that's when it begins, the withdrawal, the silent rebellion, the moment the empath chooses peace over participation. It doesn't happen dramatically. There's no announcement, no confrontation, no explosion. Just one day, they stop explaining themselves. They stop trying to be understood. They stop fighting for people who wouldn't even pick up a sword for them. They stop apologizing for things they didn't do. They stop chasing closure from those who never gave them honesty. And suddenly their silence becomes louder than any words they've ever spoken. This silence, it's not coldness, it's clarity. The empath finally understands that peace is not something others give you, it's something you protect from them. You see, before this point, the empath lived by a dangerous belief that their goodness could transform others. That if they just showed more compassion, people would learn how to love right. They believed that their empathy could fix what years of selfishness and manipulation had broken in others. But the turning point comes when they realize that compassion cannot reach those who use pain as a weapon. That not everyone wants to be saved. Some people just want a witness to their chaos. And the empath, tired of being that witness, finally steps back. At first, the world doesn't understand what's happening. The people around them notice something. The texts slow down. The invitations fade. The long emotional talks suddenly end with short answers. The empath begins to choose silence over explanation, solitude over obligation. They no longer rush to respond, no longer bend to accommodate, no longer sacrifice their peace to maintain an illusion of harmony. It confuses people, because the empath's energy was a constant source of validation for others. And now it's gone. The supply has stopped. The warmth that once melted everyone's coldness has turned inward. And yet, this withdrawal doesn't feel like strength at first. It feels like grief. The empath mourns the loss of the person they used to be, the one who believed that love could conquer all. They miss their old self, the one who stayed up late comforting others, who forgave too quickly, who said it's okay even when it wasn't. But deep down they know that version of them could not survive anymore. That old self was too open, too trusting, too willing to suffer for the sake of belonging. And so this withdrawal is not a rejection of others, it's a reclamation of self. There's something profoundly powerful about an empath who learns to conserve their energy. They stop seeing silence as weakness and start seeing it as strategy. They realize that not every battle is worth bleeding for, not every cry for help is genuine, and not every connection deserves their emotional investment. They begin to recognize patterns, the ones where they were always the giver, always the fixer, always the one carrying both sides of every relationship. And now they simply drop the weight, not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom. Because peace is not the absence of noise, it's the refusal to let that noise control you. This transformation is unsettling for those who were used to the empath's endless patience. They start to notice that their manipulative tactics, guilt, shame, emotional pleas, no longer work. The empath no longer rushes to rescue, no longer bends to explain, no longer offers comfort where there was constant chaos. To outsiders, this new behavior seems cold. You've changed, they say. You're not the same anymore. But that's the point. They aren't. They've evolved. The same heart that once felt everything now chooses what to feel. The same soul that once absorbed every emotion now filters who gets access to it. This turning point isn't about becoming heartless. It's about becoming selective. The empath realizes that not everyone deserves their kindness, that love must have discernment, that energy must have boundaries. They begin to see how much of their suffering came from mistaking endurance for loyalty. They see how many times they stayed just to avoid being misunderstood. And now they finally understand being misunderstood is better than being drained. They would rather be alone in peace than surrounded by people who mistake their compassion for weakness. The beauty of this shift is that it doesn't come with fanfare. The empath doesn't announce their awakening. They simply detach, quietly, gently, completely. They no longer explain their silence. They no longer justify their boundaries. They no longer carry guilt for choosing themselves. And those who once thrived on their constant availability feel the absence like a withdrawal. Because when the empath finally chooses peace, those who were addicted to their energy begin to panic. They reach out, not because they care, but because they can no longer feed off what's gone. But this time, the empath doesn't respond. They've learned that not every hand reaching for them deserves to be held. They've learned that silence can be the most powerful answer. They've learned that walking away doesn't mean they've lost their empathy. It means they've learned how to survive it. And this is where the shift becomes permanent. The empath, once desperate to be understood, now prefers peace over validation. They stop explaining their decisions to people who never cared to understand their feelings. They stop proving their worth to those who only valued what they could take. They realize that every time they defended their heart to the wrong person, they lost a piece of it. Now they protect it with the same intensity they once used to save others. The empath's withdrawal is not a disappearance. It's a transformation. It's the moment they understand that their energy is sacred, that not everyone deserves access to their heart, their time, or their understanding. And as they step back into their silence, they begin to see clearly who truly valued them and who merely valued their usefulness. Because once an empath chooses peace, their world grows quieter, smaller, and infinitely more real. When the empath finally chooses peace, the world around them begins to shake. The silence that once seemed like surrender now radiates power, and that power frightens people. Those who once relied on the empath's endless understanding begin to sense something unfamiliar, distant. Not the cold kind, but the kind that comes from self-respect. Suddenly the empath is no longer available at every moment. They no longer rush to respond, to fix, to absorb. They no longer bend themselves into shapes that make others comfortable. And that's when it begins, the backlash. The moment when everyone who once adored the empath's warmth starts to pull away, confused, offended, even angry. You see, when the empath changes, the people who depended on their energy feel it like withdrawal. They were addicted to the constant reassurance, the emotional safety, the unconditional forgiveness. And now that supply has been cut off. The empath no longer plays the healer. They've stopped rescuing others from the very chaos those others choose to live in. The empath's peace has created scarcity, and scarcity exposes dependency. Those who once praised the empath for being so kind now call them distant. Those who used to say "you're always there for me" now accuse them of selfishness. The world that once loved their light now resents them for turning it inward. The backlash is subtle at first. Messages that used to arrive every day start to carry an edge. The tone shifts, the warmth fades. The same people who once admired the empath's compassion now twist it against them. They'll say, "You've changed," as if growth were betrayal. They'll say, "You're not the same person anymore," as if that's a crime. What they really mean is, "You stopped serving me." Because as long as the empath was giving, forgiving, and absorbing, they were easy to love. But once they set boundaries, they became difficult to manipulate. The empath's peace disrupts the unspoken contract, the one that said, "I take, you give. I hurt you, you understand." And this is where the empath begins to see the truth. The love they thought was mutual was conditional. The support they offered was rarely returned. The empathy they gave freely was taken for granted. They begin to realize that their relationships were not built on balance, but on dependency. And that dependency only thrived as long as they remained small, soft, and self-sacrificing. So, when the empath finally reclaims their peace, those who once fed off their openness can't handle it. They lash out. They disappear. They gossip. They twist the story. They paint the empath as the villain for daring to rest. The empath doesn't fight back this time. They watch. Quietly. They observe how quickly loyalty evaporates when they stop being useful. They see how many connections were never based on love, only on access. And that realization cuts deep, not because they lose people, but because they finally see them for who they truly were. The empath has always been the glue holding everything together, keeping everyone calm, absorbing the weight of every conflict. But when they stop, the cracks show. Suddenly the friendships fall apart, the relationships grow cold, and the family ties that were built on guilt instead of care begin to loosen. It's a lonely revelation to see how many people loved you for what you gave, not for who you are. But this is the necessary pain of transformation. The empath begins to understand that peace will cost them the crowd. They cannot remain available to everyone, and at peace with themselves at the same time. The same people who once praised them for their patience will now resent them for their boundaries. Because peace, to those who thrive on chaos, feels like rejection. When the empath stops absorbing others' emotions, it forces people to face their own. And most people would rather lose the empath than confront themselves. The backlash is not always loud. Sometimes it comes in quiet exclusions. The subtle shift in tone, the unspoken distance, the invitations that no longer arrive. Other times it's more open, the accusations, the guilt trips, the emotional manipulation. You don't care anymore. You've become selfish. You've changed. The empath hears these words and feels the sting. But underneath it all there's also relief. Because every accusation confirms that they made the right choice. If peace offends someone, it means they benefited from your chaos. If your silence bothers them, It means they thrived on your availability. The empath learns that losing people is not punishment. It's exposure. The absence of those who cannot respect your peace is not loneliness. It's clarity. For years, the empath mistook attachment for connection and dependency for love. They believed that to be valuable, they had to always be needed. But now they see the truth: being constantly needed is not the same as being genuinely loved. The moment they stopped trying to be everything for everyone, they started seeing who would stay when they were nothing but themselves. And that realization changes everything. People begin to talk. They whisper that the empath has become distant, detached, even arrogant. But what they call arrogance is simply self-respect. What they call coldness is protection. What they call change is healing. The empath is no longer participating in the emotional theater that once defined their life. They are no longer the audience for everyone's pain, no longer the background character in other people's stories, and to those who were used to being centered, that shift feels like betrayal. The backlash is inevitable, because peace disrupts patterns. It breaks cycles. It exposes who was there for the real connection, and who was there for the convenience. The empath, standing quietly in their own stillness, begins to see the world with new eyes. They realize how many people confuse emotional availability with obligation. They see how many relationships are built, not on mutual respect, but on unspoken exploitation. And in that realization, something hardens within them. Not their heart, but their boundaries. They no longer chase. They no longer explain. They no longer shrink to fit. The empath's presence, once taken for granted, now becomes valuable in its rarity. Those who truly cared remain. Those who only took disappear. And though the world around them grows quieter, the silence no longer feels empty. It feels honest.